Welcome back to Theology Today, where we track how the seceder and covenanter traditions buried ancient transatlantic rivalries to forge a single unified American body. They rewrote their constitutional relationship to the civil magistrate, established strict standards for ministerial education, and successfully planted churches along the edge of the expanding frontier. But the peace of this golden era was not built to last, as the fragile synthesis achieved in Philadelphia is finally put to the ultimate test. The core question shifted from how to build a unified church to how that specific church should actually interact with a rapidly changing 19th century world. Today, a single controversial book on communion will ignite a firestorm that shatters national unity, tracking dramatic regional secessions and highly irregular midnight mergers. We track the brutal 150-year war over exclusive psalmody, showing how a resilient remnant ultimately saved its theological legacy from being swallowed by mainstream American Presbyterianism. The unity achieved in 1782 was eventually tested by deep-seated disagreements over how the church should interact with the broader Christian world outside its doors. The catalyst for this internal friction was Dr. John M. Mason's controversial book titled A Plea for Catholic Communion, which was published in the year 1816. In this theological work, Dr. John M. Mason argued for a more open approach to communion and pulpit fellowship with other neighboring evangelical denominations across the nation. Many traditionalists within the church viewed his arguments as a direct assault on historic principles and established practices, particularly the traditional commitment to practicing restrictive communion. This escalating theological dispute, combined with regional grievances over the centralization of church authority by leadership, created a widening rift that threatened to split the body. The internal strain reached a breaking point in 1820 when the entire Synod of Scioto chose to completely withdraw from the oversight of the ruling General Synod. This sudden Western defection dealt a heavy blow to denominational unity across the young American Republic, leaving the remaining national leadership deeply fractured and compromised. As the church expanded geographically, the sheer size of the American continent began to severely strain its centralized governance and slow down vital institutional communications. In the year 1821, the Synod of the Carolinas formally petitioned the General Synod to be set apart as an entirely independent and self-governing ecclesiastical body. The driving force behind this formal request was geographical isolation, which left the southern congregations detached from the main centers of governance in the north. Because the General Synod almost always met in the mid-Atlantic states, the immense travel distances made it practically impossible for southern ministers and elders to attend these annual assemblies. Recognizing the validity of these logistical challenges, the ruling General Synod granted the request willingly, allowing the Southern Brethren to establish their own separate jurisdiction. While this parting was entirely amicable, it fundamentally fragmented the church's national structure and established permanent regional independence in the American South for generations to come. Exhausted by regional defections and ongoing internal debates, the remaining leadership of the General Synod sought strength through a strategic merger with a much larger ecclesiastical body. In the fall of 1821, a small majority within the General Synod pushed through a formal union with the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America, known as the PCUSA. This historic decision allowed a significant portion of the remaining Associate Reformed structure to be fully absorbed into the mainstream Presbyterian Church, effectively ending its separate national existence. However, the vote was highly controversial and legally irregular, as it was pushed through in direct opposition to the expressed wishes of a majority of the individual presbyteries. Because the merger was forced through without true consensus, it triggered wildly different reactions across the country, fracturing the denomination along regional lines. The Synod of Pennsylvania fully merged into the PCUSA. The Synod of New York, flatly refusing to recognize the irregular union, survived the collapse of the General Synod, choosing to chart its own course as a separate and independent denomination. The synods of the West and the Carolinas completely ignored the merger, preserving their independent structures, traditional worship, and distinct theological identity intact without any northern interference. In the wake of the highly controversial 1821 merger, the remnants of the Synod of New York found themselves in a state of sudden, isolating institutional limbo. The most pressing casualty of this period was the Theological Seminary in New York City, whose operations had been completely suspended during the chaotic transitional years. To reverse this decline, the Synod took decisive action in 1829, relocating and reviving the seminary at Newburgh, New York, to train Orthodox pastors. The church appointed the Reverend Joseph McCarroll, D.D., to serve as professor, ensuring a steady supply of well-trained pastors committed to preserving their distinct theological identity. As the dust settled, a nostalgic desire for national unity prompted several church leaders to try to rebuild what had been lost in the collapse. This 1827 attempt proved to be an outright failure, confirming that the old centralized model was permanently broken as individual synods fiercely guarded their regional autonomy. While the Northeast struggled to rebuild, the Associate Reformed tradition was experiencing a dramatic resurgence beyond the mountains, fueled by steady Scots-Irish migration into the Ohio Valley. Growing so rapidly that it split into two bodies, these Western judicatories joined forces to erect a new General Synod, holding its inaugural meeting in 1841. In 1855, the Western General Synod finalized a landmark union with the Independent Synod of New York, representing a massive restoration of denominational strength across America. The newly reconstituted body boasted an impressive roster: 4 subordinate synods, 28 presbyteries, and 253 ordained ministers actively serving pulpits across the expanding nation. Far to the south, the Synod of the Carolinas, which chose peaceful independence in 1821, struggled for decades to gain numerical momentum, remaining isolated by local cultural realities. In later years, the Southern Church achieved a turnaround by pioneering distinct colonizing methods, where entire groups of established families would move together to new settlements, carrying their pastoral leadership, distinct worship, and organizational structures with them. This strategic home mission work allowed the Southern Synod to anchor itself firmly for long-term survival. The institutional struggles of the Associate Reformed Synod were deeply intertwined with intense debates over how public worship should be conducted, specifically the exclusive psalm-singing controversy. This debate was rooted in a strict interpretation of the regulative principle of worship, stating that only elements expressly commanded in Scripture may be included in public services. Traditionalists argued that the inspired Book of Psalms was the only songbook provided by God, viewing the introduction of humanly composed hymns as a dangerous departure from biblical authority. This dispute over psalm singing was not a minor argument. It lasted for more than 150 years and repeatedly split families, congregations, and presbyteries across the entire denomination. The sheer length and intensity of the conflict showed just how deeply held these theological convictions were, as guarding exclusive psalmody was viewed as a matter of basic faithfulness. For the strict traditionalists within the synod, this exhausting struggle was entirely necessary, ensuring that the praises offered to God remained entirely pure and completely biblical. Beyond the music sung in the pews, the synod maintained a clear boundary around the Lord's table, fully embracing the Westminster Confession with the sole exception of civil magistrates. To protect this theological purity, the Church maintained strict closed communion policies inherited from the Scottish Presbyterian tradition, a practice central to their core identity. This practice meant that participation in the Lord's Supper was strictly limited to members of the local congregation or individuals from sister churches carefully vetted by the session. The purpose of this restriction was to safeguard the table from unexamined partaking and to ensure that all communicants were in full doctrinal and disciplinary agreement. This strict approach served as a major cultural marker, clearly distinguishing the Associate Reformed Synod from mainstream American Presbyterian bodies, increasingly adopting more open and ecumenical communion practices. Despite sharing a common commitment to the Westminster Standards, the Synod was frequently disrupted by internal disputes regarding how church power should actually be exercised. While having identical doctrinal standards should have fostered peace, common subscription to the confession proved insufficient to overcome deep-seated disagreements regarding structural authority. Regional factions frequently clashed over the practical boundaries of ecclesiastical authority, centering on whether local presbyteries had the right to chart their own paths independent of central oversight. The primary structural tensions also involve synodical oversight, with ongoing bitter disagreements regarding how far the General Synod could go in enforcing uniformity across diverse geographic regions. A continuous tug-of-war existed between the independence of the local session and the judicial authority of the higher church courts, causing deep rifts across the denomination. These disputes were often aggravated by geographic isolation and regional rivalries, demonstrating that even when ministers agreed perfectly on theology, finding structural consensus remained a difficult hurdle. Despite enduring intense structural splits, geographic separations, and pressure to merge with larger Presbyterian bodies, the surviving branches of the Associate Reformed tradition demonstrated remarkable, lasting resilience. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Church had stabilized its losses and maintained a solid footprint, successfully numbering approximately 12,000 members spread across 9 regional presbyteries. Over the course of the following century, this modest core experienced steady organic growth, eventually climbing to approximately 35,000 members through consistent long-term congregational expansion. This expansion proved that the denomination was highly effective at local church planting, demonstrating that a distinct conservative theological identity could serve as a firm foundation for survival. A central factor in the survival of the Associate Reformed identity, particularly in the American South, was its strategic investment of resources into higher education institutions. In 1837, the Southern Synod founded Erskine Theological Seminary to secure a pipeline of pastoral leadership, expanding in 1839 by establishing Erskine College to provide rigorous classical education. Both institutions were deliberately built on a shared campus in the town of Due West, South Carolina, quickly turning Due West into the intellectual and cultural capital of the tradition. These schools served as vital institutional anchors, protecting theological continuity and shaping generations of leaders, keeping the distinct identity alive long after national structures had fractured. The complex history of the Synod eventually crystallized into a durable modern structure, with the surviving body officially adopting its permanent name in 1858 to reflect its unique trajectory. In 1935, the Church added the term General Synod to its official title to reaffirm its continuous traditional commitment to a strict and orthodox Presbyterian hierarchy. By the late 20th century, official denominational statistics from 1987 recorded that the General Synod of the ARPC had grown to encompass 177 active churches and 289 communing members. This verified that despite being smaller than mainstream Presbyterian bodies, the ARPC had successfully maintained its distinct institutional life and structural witness across 2 centuries of American history. The modern church that descended from the historic 1782 union remained deeply shaped by foundational ideals, exhibiting a vibrant, practical piety balancing doctrinal precision with global missions. Over the years, the Church adapted to its circumstances by placing an increasing emphasis on local church government, allowing individual sessions greater freedom to manage their local ministries. Ultimately, the surviving denomination maintained its historic allegiance to the Westminster Standards, guarding them with varying degrees of firmness across different geographic regions of the country. By preserving this theological commitment, the modern church remained true to the original 1782 vision, proving that historic Reformed orthodoxy could successfully endure through changing times. The story of the 1782 Union forces us to look in the mirror and confront how we handle our own deep ecclesiastical disagreements today. These pioneers managed to bridge deep historic divides for the sake of a greater mission, showing that structural unity is possible even when past wounds run deep. It leaves us with a challenging paradox about the nature of the church. Can true theological orthodoxy genuinely survive without the walls of strict separation? How much of our current denominational fracturing is driven by absolute biblical conviction, and how much is simply a stubborn preservation of historical habits? The story of American Presbyterianism doesn't stop here. In fact, the structural plot only thickens as we move forward into the future. Join us next week as we continue climbing further up the branches of the Presbyterian tree, shifting our focus to a massive 19th century theological tectonic shift. We will examine the fascinating rise, frontier revival, and unique doctrinal distinctives that define the historical birth of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. If you want to keep exploring the deep theological roots, hidden histories, and complex controversies that completely shaped the modern church, subscribe now. Make sure to hit that notification bell and subscribe to Theology Today, your definitive go-to YouTube channel for rich church history made accessible.